Hi, everybody. Welcome. As you're coming on in, can you let me know that you can hear me okay? You can do so by thumbs upping, I think, maybe. I know that folks who are running this can hear me, but I want to make sure the audio quality is good for folks who are attending as well. So thanks for your patience. We'll get started in like maybe a minute. We'll let people do a soft launch at 12:01. We'll give people a chance to get situated, get what they're having for lunch if you're on the Eastern time zone, or maybe just a breakfast if you're on the Western time zone. And we'll get started in 1 minute. All right, well, it's 1 minute. I guess we get started.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Welcome, everybody. I'm Laura Aiken. I'm the Executive Director of Strategy and Innovation and Strategic Custom Programs and Executive and Professional Education here at Bentley. And welcome to Bentley's Power Hour. These sessions are designed to provide short, high-impact learning experiences for professionals like you. And over the course of our hour together, you'll gain practical insights and strategies that you can immediately apply in your work to drive innovation and excel in your career. So before we kick off with Professor Gary David's Creating Connected Cultures, the Human Experience Advantage in Business session, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping details and share a little bit more about Bentley with you. So keep in mind, you probably already noticed this, that recording is on, and you are welcome to add questions into the Q&A section, and you're also welcome to use reactions along the way as well. Thumbs up, hearts, whatever suits your fancy during our conversation. Camera and sound is off so that you can enjoy relaxing, kicking back, and taking in the content while using the opportunity to engage in Q&A as you feel engaged to do so. You are also welcome to click closed captioning in the right button of your little in the bottom right corner of the Zoom, so that if that is your preference, you're welcome to do so as well. And as far as what to expect over the course of our hour, we'll spend the first 5 minutes just learning a little bit more about Bentley, and then we'll get right into our interactive presentation and discussion, and then we'll wrap up with about 15 minutes left to answer any questions that arise. But please feel free to add your questions throughout the session, and as it makes sense, we might incorporate it into parts of the presentation, but we'll definitely be sure to answer them by the end. So to learn a little bit more about Bentley, we offer short course programs, graduate degrees, and executive PhD programs. So we have you covered when you think about lifelong learning. One way to engage with Bentley is through one of our many programs that I wanted to highlight here, which is our mini MBA Business Essentials, which is one of our flagship programs that we've offered for many years now. And in particular, I wanted to highlight because Professor Gary David is part of this particular program. So if at the end you want more, there's many ways to get more Gary David, and this is one of them. This is a 6-day program that's over a 3-week period, and it is in person at Bentley. This is an opportunity to gain foundations, everything from marketing to design thinking, as well as supply chain management and finance and leadership. So it's one of our great foundation courses to certainly consider. One of our next offerings, we offer every fall and every spring semester, and our next one is coming up starting March 6th. If you have any questions about this, feel free to Q&A us, and we'll be sure to share more information as well. And another way to continue to stay engaged, I'm sure we have some Bentley alumni out there also interested in thinking about what it means to continue a degree with Bentley if you completed your undergrad. We do offer our professional MBA, which is an online hybrid program that's part-time. I'm a Bentley alum. I completed my MBA, and I wish this is the program I had an opportunity to engage in because this is magic, and especially because it is cohort-based. So you have an opportunity to not only gain skills that are relevant in today's future of work, but you also have the opportunity to be part of a cohort in this flexible hybrid modality that works for your working life. So that part-time model really is a great alignment as well. It is designed for mid-career professionals. It's truly community focused with immersion weekends as some of your in-person program time. And it's really designed to accelerate your career if you are considering an MBA. Please let us know if you have any additional questions, and we can provide some more information after this as well. And then we have our main event. So before we kick things off, I want to just introduce the topic again. So today we'll be covering creating connected cultures, the human experience advantage in business. So today we'll explore the intersection of human experience, employee experience, and the workplace culture to address key challenges and trends in creating connected, inclusive, and thriving organizations. So without further ado, I'll toss it over to Gary David, our professor of sociology and experience design at Bentley University. And we'll be back on at the end where my colleague Sarah Morris and I will field any questions as they arise during the session. Thanks for being here, Gary.
Thanks for having me. It's one of the things I've been at Bentley now for 25 years. And one of the things I love about being here and have loved about being here, besides the tuition reimbursement for my daughter, who's also a sophomore, is the fact that I'm able to engage sociology in applied contexts. And, I never envisioned I would be at a business school when I was doing my PhD in sociology back in Detroit, where I'm from. But it turned out to be the best thing possible for me, especially being at Bentley, because of the way that we emphasize and embrace the integration of arts and science with business. And I'd like to think I embody that since I'm in a sociology department, but I'm also in a business department of experience design. And I teach undergraduate and graduate, both in the MBA, the mini MBA, but also the HFID program as well. And the reason why is because, going back to the Simon Sinek quote, that 100% of customers are people, 100% of employees are people. If you don't understand people, you don't understand business. And sociologists are about understanding people. And this is, what we do. Sometimes that can be a scary proposition, understanding and studying people. But when we're talking about creating connected environments, especially in business, because so much of our lives, whether as customers, as employees, as other stakeholders, involve business, business becomes a really important place to try to think about how we make connection. And so we don't have a lot of time for a very big topic. There's a lot of opportunities through the offerings that Laura talked about and through other offerings that are under discussion right now, but there's to dig more into these topics. But the four key questions that I want to talk about here. What are workers today looking for in the workplace? And that's a really big topic. So we're going to treat it in generalities. How do we or how might we create workplace communities? Why does organizational belonging matter? And what are organizational trends in relation to diversity, equity, and inclusion programs? I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news or not, but there's been a lot of movement recently around DEI efforts. In education, in business, in nonprofits, in law, and in society. I teach a course on DEI, and so this is something I track pretty closely. And so we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but obviously that deserves a much longer conversation as well. Let's start with a topic that I teach in our MBA program in an asynchronous MBA program on employee experience. And when people ask me what is employee experience and how might it differ from employee engagement, I summarize it as an employee experience. Our goal is to design the workplace to optimize it for those who work there. Employee experience is about optimizing the business for the employee. Employee engagement, on the other hand, is more about how to optimize the employee for the business. Both can be worthy goals, but by flipping it and focusing on the employee, the idea, and research has borne this out, is that the organization will also do better. So it's not an either or, that either we optimize it for the employee or the business. It's that by optimizing it and focusing on employee needs, the employee experience, we optimize it also for the business. And this becomes a really important part of employee experience. We think about the workplace today from an intergenerational perspective. I have a lot to say that's critical about how we formulate and assess meaning to generational cohorts. But just because we usually talk in these terms, let's think about it this way, that the workplace today, right, is home to four generations of workers and maybe even, broaching five based upon, what kind of business it is. I mean, you might have Gen Alpha if it's a place like some kind of service business, you might have Gen Alpha there. So that might be five generations all occupying the workplace at one time. And so work becomes a really crucial conduit of intergenerational interaction and intergenerational connection. But obviously, along with that, can create some issues because we can see some differences, and survey data bears this out, differences in terms of what people from different generations are looking for. I'm a member of Gen X, and how I view the workplace and how I view my relation to work was very different than how my parents did. And it's going to be very different in many ways than how my daughters do. I have a daughter who's a sophomore at Bentley, who's just on that edge of Gen Z as being 20 years old, and I have another daughter who is just got her work permit, and she's 15. So their conceptualizations of work can be very different. In terms of Gen Z, there's all kinds of studies that we can point to on this. They want kind of the following things: flexibility in the workplace in terms of remote work. There's a lot that's discussed in terms of COVID, and I think some of that discussion might be overblown. But one of the things we do know is that these kids today are very comfortable with online environments, both from their educational experiences during COVID, but also just how they live their lives in, distributed ways, right? So they're very comfortable with that. Folks in Gen Z want a work-life balance more. They want to prioritize that. And don't we all? We'll talk about that more in a second. This is really important, valuing the importance of diversity and inclusion. So in the midst, and I'll talk about this briefly at the end, in the midst of all this talk about DEI in business and in society, companies need to think about attracting the best talent through having these kinds of programs. Not necessarily because the people applying are part of these programs directly, but because they expect to see them and they want them there. And to them, it speaks to the values of the company, which is the fourth bullet, emphasizing the mission and social value proposition of work, that people in Gen Z report wanting to see a commitment, and not just in words, but in deeds, to different values that they hold as important. And finally, people in Gen Z, they want opportunity for career development and new skills. And so, in thinking about the workplace and creating a workplace experience, particularly for Gen Z, for instance, there is this emerging notion of these are factors that become critical. And one of the questions we can talk about is, to what extent is your company doing this as a strategy to attract and retain the best talent? But more generally speaking, we can think about, what do we want from work and when? Breaking down what we all want from work. How do we create caring environments and employee experience? At different times in our careers, we might want work that's meaningful. We might want work that provides a work-life balance. We might want work that pays well, that has a higher salary. We might prioritize and value job security. We might prioritize and value how much control we have over our work. And you all can think about, I don't know who you all are, but I'm imagining you can think about, especially if you've been at this for as long as I have now, almost 55 years old, you can see at different points in your life, different things mattered more and different things mattered less. And so it's important from an employee experience standpoint to think about not judging where people are, but understanding where they are and designing for that. I wrote a blog years ago that I talked about reboarding employees. We talk about onboarding, we talk about offboarding. What about reboarding? What about the employee who's been there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and they don't necessarily feel cared for or nurtured or valued? The attention is on the new people, or the attention is on the people leaving. And it can be really easy for people in their mid-career to feel lost. And so creating a connected environment is not just thinking in terms of the newest employees, but it's also thinking about the employees that are vital for your organization's success, that often can be overlooked because we're just there, right? You're just used to us. And I say us because I'm part of that cohort, right? I've been at Bentley for 25 years and I love working here. Any organization is going to struggle to a certain extent in terms of how they feel all employees equally cared for. And not just equally cared for, but I would say equitably cared for, addressing their needs and their considerations that are unique to those types of employees. So I think this is a really important thing to think about for companies. You can think about it at your workplace. Do you think about these things? To what extent do you gauge these things with employees? Are there these touch point conversations? Um, Obviously, most organizations do surveys, but I like to challenge people to think about how they collect data on these points without using a survey to make sure you're tapped into it. And so thinking about this, I have a recommendation. We need to engage with our workers to know what they are looking for at different parts of their professional journeys. At the very beginning, at the middle, at the end, if you want to divide it that way. I have a good friend of mine who's in customer experience who recently took a job and she's like, you know what? I don't want to be a leader. I don't want to have a lot of responsibility. I'm at the stage of my career where I just want to be able to do work that I enjoy, help people that are new, and be able to feel like I'm making a difference. Because, in her words, I've been there. I've been a leader before. I've been at the top before, and I enjoyed it, but I don't want that now. Well, just because she doesn't want that now doesn't mean that she doesn't have anything to contribute. And so part of the job of leaders, of managers, is to create environments that leverage the talents and abilities and skills of those who are part of their business. The other thing that I like to encourage people to think about is in designing employee experience, we need to use what is known as a participatory design approach, in which those who are being designed for are active partners. So we're not designing at, we're not designing for, and we're certainly not designing against, but we're designing with. We're designing with the input and the insights of those who are our audience across their professional journey. And so this becomes an important part of building an employee experience in which people feel connected and belonging. As a sociologist, I'm very fascinated with creating connected environments. I'd like to tell people that sociology is a science of belonging and connection. This is what drives us, how people organize themselves into social systems and how they form relationships in those systems. And in looking at something like community building, I like to talk about managers not as managers, but as community organizers, community developers. What are the elements of community that become really important? And this kind of goes to what are elements of shared experience, where we have an experience that we both connect around, that we can share in a way that we find a common ground in. And I'm not going to go through all of these because it would take way too much time. I teach a course on design experiences where I break these down in far greater detail. But some of the key things in organizations are, do we have a shared orientation as to why we're here, as to why we're doing this, as to what we're trying to accomplish, as to what's important? Do we have a shared sense of what's fulfillment mean? You think about metrics and measuring success. Whose metrics are these? And for whom are they important? Are they important to everyone as equally? I have some videos on a YouTube channel I'll mention in a little bit around KPIs and OKRs and creating an inclusive measurement strategy based on participatory design. So we need to think about inclusive and shared fulfillment ideas. Are people able to make contributions and are those contributions recognized and appreciated? There's nothing worse. Well, there's a lot of things worse, but something that can be pretty bad is where you're trying to make a contribution, you're volunteering of yourself and you don't feel like that's appreciated. When I gave a TED Talk, which is also on my YouTube site, where I played a montage of proposal rejection videos. There are people who record their wedding proposals, marriage proposals, and they don't go well. And you feel for them because we've all been in a place where we're trying to give gifts of ourselves that aren't appreciated or aren't accepted. Hopefully not a marriage proposal, but something less high stakes. But in the workplace, if the workplace is not set up to accept the gifts I'm giving, then I'm not going to feel connected. Is there collaboration? Do I feel like I'm included as a partner in these efforts that are truly collaborative? Is there an opportunity for participation? And what are the environments that we're sharing? Not just physical, but also virtual. And how can we create environments that allow for connection to take place? One of the things I talk about as a sociologist and a social psychologist, especially around my work on intercultural communication, is what I call the pronoun progression. And quite simply, it's rooted in this notion of when people view each other as an us and them, there can be increased social distance because you can't be a member of an in-group and an out-group at the same time necessarily. I mean, theoretically you can, but often those people are asked to choose, especially in social contexts in which the stakes are high and there's a lot of tension. You know, people don't look for neutrality and belonging to both. You can't be a Boston Red Sox and a New York Yankees fan. I mean, you could, it's just not done, right? You can be a Boston Red Sox and a Kansas City Royals fan. That's okay, unless the Boston Red Sox are playing the Royals in the American League Conference Championship. So, us and them often is the grounds of conflict. Those people are different than us people. You and I gets more into interpersonal, where you might be a member of an outgroup, but I know you personally, and so I can connect with you and value your friendship or value you as a person. And we can see social distance decreasing. We're still different people, but I see you more as an individual than as a representation of the group. But the collective is when we get down to we. How do we form collectives where we have a shared identity? I've done research on this in a lot of different settings. And one of the things that I see take place is the places that are successful are those that allow for commonality to surface. The company Zappos talked about creating opportunities for collision for people to engage. Um, we might have employee interest groups is one thing I recommend so that people who are shared interests can find them across organizational silos. It's creating the opportunity to find commonality and connection through a shared social identity. And so as workers, as managers, as just human beings, one of the things we want to think about is how does this happen in real life? And how do we actively engage in creating environments where the collective can occur? And also being wary of situations that might arise that take that collective and throw us back into intergroup. And this is a tricky bit of business, right? This is why we don't talk about some topics in some situations because of the risk of ruining that collective by increasing the intergroup. But a good person in managing this will be able to figure out how to move back into that collective. It doesn't mean we all have to be the same, but it all means we have to situate ourselves in a way in which we can see the commonality between us. And that becomes a crucial part to creating connected organizations. So a recommendation here starts to be around creating environments of community and connection through establishing things that matter and are shared. As I said, employee interest groups. There's a lot of talk about employee resource groups, which I do think are important and are valuable. Employee resource groups tend to be situated around social demographics and identities of groups that have been historically marginalized either in society or within the organization or industry. And all of that becomes crucially important for folks who are members of those groups to feel connected and represented and not isolated and to feel supported. All of that really, really matters. I would also encourage companies to create things like employee interest groups around anything that is of interest. A real quick story as an example of this. I was doing some research on software development teams with offices in India, Ireland, and the United States. And this was all within one organization. And I noticed in looking at lunchrooms, because lunchrooms are always fascinating places to see the presence or absence of connection, that the American men and the men from India they were not sitting together. They were sitting separate. So I started to think about, well, what do men typically talk about in terms of small talk? Often, not always, but often men might talk about sports, right? It's a generalization, it's a stereotype, doesn't hold true for every situation, but you know, also not uncommon for men to talk about sports. Um, how are men from America, from the United States and India going to talk about sports when they watch different sports? So one of the things I recommended to this company is why don't you ask or encourage the men from India to do brown bag luncheon sessions on the rules of cricket and how cricket is played? And then you can have men from the United States give brown bag lunches about the rules of baseball, or the rules of football, or whatever sport. And the point here is not that we're not emphasizing that they like different sports. We're emphasizing that they all like sports. And it provides this avenue of connection around a shared identity. So there are ways big, like these programs, or small, like these, opportunities where people can find commonality and connection and reduce that social distance. We need to endeavor to establish shared identities that incorporate all elements of identity and community and not just relying on superficial elements. By that, I mean this, and I want to be very clear on it. I was also doing research in a company and they said, oh, we're a flat organization. And no matter where you go in the world, you visit one of our sites, everyone has the same ID badge, the same color walls are used, the same type of paint. It's very consistent across sites, no matter where you are in the world. And they were right. But at a deeper level, there were some very stark distinctions. The people in India were kind of kept on the outside of knowledge sharing. The people in the United States were actually separated from headquarters, which was in Boston, to other parts of the United States. So while in terms of environments, there was commonality, there wasn't necessarily connection because there were some deeper underlying issues that were creating separation and social distance among the different sites. And so I was just working with the company along with some colleagues to think about how might we create better connections um, beyond just the superficial. We all have the same business cards and name badges and colored walls, and into some deeper things around contribution, fulfillment, orientation, symbols, and other features of shared experience. So that becomes crucially important of not just starting with the superficial that, we all have the same name badges, but also digging into some of the other social patterns that might exist. We are, after all, social beings. This is a great book by Matthew Lieberman, who is, I think, a neuropsychologist, something very smart that I could never do. And he wrote an entire book about how our brains are wired to connect. And, the notion that we are fundamentally social beings from evolution. We want to feel connected with others, and we all kind of know what that feels like, right? When we feel connected, you know, we can feel better. Our brains function differently through fMRI scans that he talked about in the book. Different parts of our brain light up when we feel these connections, and parts of our brain can be dark when we don't. And so being social and having these connections, actually very important. And it's important in the workplace as well. This is a story from Harvard Business Review, the value of belonging at work. If workers feel like they belong, companies reap substantial bottom line benefits. High belonging was linked to a whopping 56% increase in job performance, a 50% drop in turnover risk, and a 75% reduction in sick days. For a 10,000 person company, this would result in annual savings of more than $52 million. And this is from 2019. So we know belonging is good for the bottom line. It's good for business. And this goes back to my point. If we optimize the environment for employees, then business will benefit. If we create connected environments that people value and crave because we're human beings, business will benefit. Businesses will reap that that's the positive outcomes of that event. We have another one. This is from the American Psychological Association. A sense of belonging is crucial for employees, how employers can foster connection and social support. Their 2024 Work in America survey found that workers who experience higher levels of psychological safety are more likely than workers experiencing lower levels of psychological safety to say they feel like they belong, 95 versus 69%, and that they feel comfortable being themselves in the workplace, 95 to 75%. So, psychological safety, I'm not a psychologist. I do have an undergraduate degree in psychology, which is just enough to make me dangerous in that respect. So, we have other faculty who can talk much more eloquently and from an informed perspective around psychological safety. I can talk about sociological safety, and I can talk about when we create environments where people not just feel supported, but that support is expressed, where it's demonstrated, where it's vocalized, where it is not just in our mission statement, but it's part of our lived experience, then people can feel social safety. They can feel supported by others. And that social support becomes a crucial part of making connected environments and connected workplaces. I didn't throw in slides on this because didn't have enough time, but there's all kinds of data out there on isolation in the workplace and the growing sense of isolation. When I teach my MBA class on employee experience, I have content related to that. That we do have what can feel like this epidemic or pandemic of isolation at work. I should also add, I have a video on my YouTube channel that I'll reference in a second, show you in a second, where people over 40 can really feel bullied at work. There was a survey done by one company, and I think it was like 96% of people over 40 have felt bullied in the workplace because of their age, or feel ostracized or alienated because of their age. 40, right? I'm 55, so that's really depressing. So obviously that can be very different based on what kind of job it is, what kind of industry we're talking about. But that's not safety. That's not psychological safety around age. And so this idea of social safety, of psychological safety, of belonging as crucial to business success has been borne out over and over and over again by surveys and by research on these topics. So as recommendations, we need to consider the sense of support and belonging a workplace is creating for all who are there, as well as act to improve it. What are we doing as a business to create better senses of safety at different levels? At the macro level, as an entire organization, at a meso level, as at the either the um, department level or project team level, and at the micro level through interactions with one another. How are we creating this environment so that people feel like they belong, they feel like they're supported, and they feel like they are cared for? Which brings us to this topic of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and belonging, and because the names are changing. This is one of the things we're seeing in the DEI space in organizations is not necessarily a pullback, but a reframing and renaming, which we can talk about in the slides and also in questions and answers if people are interested. These programs are about creating environments in which people can be supported, connected, and valued. And this is what DEI is about. When people say something about like, they're either not in favor of DEI or are suspicious of it, I'll simply ask the questions. Do you think that workplaces should be home, that should be a place that welcomes people of diverse talents, abilities, perspectives, and experiences? Yes. Do you want to be treated fairly and justly in your workplace? Yes. Do you feel like your voice and your abilities should be included in the workplace? Yes. Then you're in favor of DEI because that's what it's about. Okay. That's at its core what these principles are about. And it turns out workers continue to value the contributions of DEI related programs and trainings. This is from Pew 2023. A majority of workers say DEI related policies and resources have had a positive impact in their workplace. Policies to ensure everyone is treated fairly in hiring, pay, and promotions. Not surprisingly, 72% very or somewhat positive on those policies. Affinity groups or ERGs, 60%. A way for employees to see salary ranges for all positions. Staff member whose main job is to promote DEI at work, 60%. Trainings or meetings on DEI at work, 57%. I kind of treat that last one as almost like your dentist, and I'll explain. Nobody says they like going to the dentist, but people often like their dentist. Reversing that, people are usually in favor of DEI programs, but they might not have enjoyed the ones they had to take. And so this raises the issue of making sure the programs that you have around these topics, if you have these programs, are done well and actually take into account feedback and insights from your audience, which are your employees. So, the trainings on meetings at DEI at work, some of the data has been there. People are in favor of them as conceptual, but they might not have loved the videos they had to watch at their desk and then taking a quick quiz afterwards. So, and we've seen DEI professionals talk about that as well as we kind of move into this next phase of DEI work. Business leaders across the board see diversity initiatives as very important for their business strategy. This is from last year. How important are diversity initiatives at your company's overall business strategy? Business leaders, 82% across the board. Even business leaders, quote unquote, conservative, however they define that, 75% very important, 20% somewhat important. So once again, when people talk about companies are, running away from DEI, there are those in the headlines that might be in some instances or might be reframing and renaming, but I wouldn't say necessarily abandoning. Or if they are, they're doing so at their own peril for creating a successful company and having a successful strategy because having diverse voices in which their voices feel included and in which they're treated fairly creates connected environments. And connected environments are important for business success. So all of these things work together. I talked about my YouTube channel. I've been every week posting a new video, trying to keep it around 5 minutes or under on connected workplaces and connected environments, especially with a focus around DEI. And not just workplaces. I mean, I have one there on inclusive playgrounds as well, which was very interesting. I'm working on one right now. I just recorded. I need to edit the upload on Friday on companies facing lawsuits like Starbucks and Target. Starbucks is facing a lawsuit from Missouri. Target is facing a lawsuit out of Florida around their DEI policies. And these are brought by the states of Missouri and Florida. And one of the things I talk about in this video is that legal courts are not the only courts your company's being judged in. It's also the court of public opinion. And so while companies are trying to figure out how they situate themselves in relation to the current political climate and how they respond to governmental action around their policies, that's not the only stakeholder they need to consider because customers are looking at their reactions in to those challenges as they come up, and employees are looking as well. And so companies need to be thoughtful and careful around how they react to some of these challenges in this current environment because they're managing a lot of audiences. Okay. And so there's a lot to keep in mind in terms of if you please one audience, what does that do to the other audience? The main point here is how do you stay true to who you want to say you are as a brand and as a company? And how do you live those values? How do you live that strategy as not just when it's convenient or when you think it's expedient for public relations, but because it's core to who you are as a company? So, folks, I mean, all these videos are obviously free. You can feel free to go on there. And I also do engage in a very constructive way with people who post comments, which is also very entertaining. So, recommendations here. If businesses are going to attract the best talent, especially among younger generations, as we talked about with Gen Z, they will need to retain DEI related programs. They might reframe it, they might rename it, but they need to retain it. So maybe that's another video. Retain, reframe, rename to retain. I'll have to play with that idea. But that's something to think about for companies. And some companies are getting rid of human resources as a name, and they're adding in Department of Peoples. Or instead of calling it DEI, they're calling it belonging and wellness, or employee experience, and thinking about how they cast a wider net around these programs. Companies are creating a more expansive notion of what DEI means in relation to their workforces. This can also be important. One of the things that we have seen not talked about as much historically around DEI efforts are things like socioeconomic status. Here at Bentley, we have a first generation college student initiative, which goes after a different element of diversity. around kids or students, I call them kids, students who are young adults who are first generation in their family to go to college, as I basically was a first generation college student. And so we think about neurodiversity. We think about other elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion, representing the voices in our organization that may feel marginalized and disconnected in a way so that they feel like they belong. That becomes the important operation and goal there. How do we create environments where everybody feels like they are connected and that they belong? So, in summary, maybe we can get to any questions or comments folks have. When we attend to the human need to belong and design experiences with our partners, we can better create connected cultures and achieve positive outcomes for our stakeholders. So, human centered design, also system centered design, right? There's this, thinking about the broader system for which we're designing, that's not just human centric, but also involves other things in our environment, such as the environment. And so we can think about everything we do is a design decision, whether we know it or not. And so part of design and experience design is that we're intentional and thoughtful about what it is we're doing, and ideally using what we know from social sciences, sociology, anthropology, psychology, and as well as what we know about business. And I know this is what we do in our experience design department here at Bentley, is we think about that intersection of the social sciences and business and design to create outcomes that best meet the needs and wants of our audiences who are the recipients of our design. There are links that are available for some of the things I referenced. And with that, there's the contact information. And as promised, we have about 15 minutes of questions and answers. So I'll bring back in Laura.
Thank you so much. That gave me a lot to think about for sure. And I know a lot of wheels are spinning, I'm sure, based upon those of you here today. So feel free to add any questions that may have come up for you or observations. You can add them right into the chat or the Q&A either way, and we'll address anything that's top of mind.
And there's a download for today's slides. And I'll leave this up for folks to take a picture of as we get any questions, comments, thoughts, reactions, or insights, or anything I missed. By all means, let me know. I'm happy to hear your thoughts.
I just wanted to jump in and make sure that the chat Q&A option was working for y'all. Some of you are on mobile devices, others on your desktop. So if you're having trouble with the chat or the Q&A, please raise your hand, react so that I can allow you to talk if you have questions.
And it looks like we have a question. Are events a good way for employees to feel appreciated at a company?
Thank you, anonymous attendee. I always tell my students in my classes, especially my grad classes, every time I say it depends, drink. Water, stay well hydrated, not anything that might get you in trouble, especially at work. I think it depends. And you know, I've I'll just tell like one really quick story. There's a really great company called Glidewell, which if you have anything in your mouth that is not native to your body, but as a result of dental work, they probably made it. It's the world's largest dental lab. I did a project with them around their call centers, actually. So, and it was very employee experience related. One of the things that they did an amazing job at is having events that celebrated different holidays and important points on the calendar for their employees. And yeah, I think that that benefited everybody because everybody could go to the Chinese New Year. Everybody could go to whatever celebration there was, and everyone benefited from it. So they can be beneficial. I think if you are creating a day that is targeted at any or has any particular group in mind in terms of celebrating them, obviously you want to include them in the process of planning it and creating it. But also, I think, thinking beyond those, what we can typically consider to be those demographic kind of distinctions, around DEI and think about how we create opportunities for collision around shared identities, shared hobbies, shared points of interest that are that cut across those demographic lines. I also think those are good things. So yeah, I think programs, events can be a good thing. I'm probably the last person to ask. I often don't attend them, but I think people do enjoy them and they do like them, and I do think it can make people feel valued. Um, no matter what you do, there's a risk that it could backfire. If people see like, oh, sure, like we have an event, but I still, my manager is still no good. It's going to ring hollow. But I think that's where testing and doing some research on the back end to see how effective these efforts are, and then making changes based on the findings of how, whether or not the effort you had was successful in what you tried to accomplish.
That's great.
How
And I
would you?
have follow-up questions to that. I know we have a couple other questions as well. What considerations should be kept in mind? I know you talked about different generations. So as
Yep.
it relates to some of these opportunities from your experience and research, how have you seen some of the generations view these types of events differently as well, if there's a perspective to add there?
Yeah, I mean, like just from a one thing, just as a practical matter, I was, I have children, right? And I need to get home to them after work often, right? And so, or if there's something happening on the weekend, I have things I need to do at home on the weekend because I have a family I'm trying to take care of and a house and things like that. I say all that to say a younger employee who does not have those obligations may welcome these opportunities differently. You know what I mean? And so part of it might not have anything to do with, the value prop, the ways in which different generations value things differently, but it might just be logistics. And so, this is where it kind of starts to get into, are we unintentionally leaving folks out because of certain kinds of elements and features? That's one of the things that I consider. I mean, in terms of, I mean, everyone likes to have a good time, however that good time might be. Um, is there opportunity to make sure that there's a suite of offerings that people across the board can take advantage of? Like just for instance, and this is like, I don't know if anybody does this or not, but I spend a lot of time on Twitch, like watching people do gaming or play chess and things like that. And I also live stream on Twitch. I don't know if people like to play video games. Can you create a organizational based video game club where people can connect and play Fortnite or Call of Duty or, Marvel Heroes or whatever together? I mean, I don't know, why not? But the first thing you have to do is understand what people's interests are, then find ways of connecting with them. And it doesn't have to be for some big grand goal other than just to make connections. And, hey, if you need help finding somebody to play with, let's start a video game group, and we can get together once a week and just, team up and play, you know, a video game together.
Yeah, I love that example. Another question we have, a little bit different, that I also greatly appreciate, as we do quite a bit of custom work through executive and professional education, specifically in the GCC. So this is really nicely aligned with this. How would you translate these principles to Middle Eastern or Far East global employees?
Um, I'm gonna say something at the start of that, and I really don't mean to cause any kind of offense to it, but I am a person of some Arab ancestry, and I've taught courses in the Arab world. One of the things is like Middle East and Far East is even terms can be kind of loaded because it's like Middle East to what? Um, and also keeping in mind that the Middle East as a concept involves a couple different groups that share different cultures. Iran is different than Turkey, is different than the Arab world, is different than Israel, although there might be many things in common. I think so. That's like one of the things, I'm not saying that to be like, oh, that's a horrible question, but just that's like one of the first things that comes to my mind. Another thing that comes to my mind, this is kind of a funny story, is I went to Kuwait, Dubai, Bahrain to do research years ago. And I went and spoke with a number of business executives who were running very large and successful companies in these regions. And one of the things that became very clear very quickly is that they all had traveled the world very extensively, and many of them had gotten degrees in in countries other than their own. And so they were very interculturally fluent, right? And I remember talking with one person. I said, True story. I said, there's this thing I saw in this book about how to do business in the Arab world, that said if a woman exposes her arms, that it's offensive. And he looked at me and said, I went to the University of Miami in Florida. I vacation in the south of France. It would take a lot to surprise me. And of course, I wouldn't have a problem if a person did that as long as I knew they weren't being disrespectful. And so much of it comes from intent that we have to create environments where people can make mistakes, if they're honest mistakes, without making them feel bad for it. And so, as an Arab American and as a person who knows Lebanon and Syria, where my ancestry comes from, is different than Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and Oman and Qatar, is different from Morocco and Algeria, and in Egypt, it's a whole other case, right? So I would caution against, number one, using very large categorizations as placeholders for local culture. Number two, I would be hesitant to assume that we're all that different. I mean, there are differences, but all that different? Because difference is a matter of perspective. Islam might be different than Christianity, but they are Abrahamic traditions, and same with Judaism. They're all Abrahamic traditions that share elements of a common faith. So there can be points of alignment that we can identify and connect around, just as a for instance. And number three, finding opportunities to surface connection and commonality. Right? It's important to appreciate, in my opinion, important to appreciate and respect difference, but also seek out and identify commonality. And that's one of the things that I talk about quite a bit in my classes, in my work.
I love that. We're more alike than we are different.
Sometimes, yeah, we can be until you're a Yankees fan and I'm a Red Sox fan, and then it's like, then all bets are off.
It's all over after
Then
that.
it's all then we can't get along.
Another question we have. Does Bentley conduct research or collect data from organizations on how their DEI initiatives may be changing?
And a part of this I want to kick over to you, Laura, because I know, of the professional executive education and the Center for Women in Business. You might be able to speak to that more directly. I do know we have faculty who do their own work on these topics, but I also know we have a number of relationships with organizations like Bloomberg, where we do in an ongoing way, collect data on things and topics related on things. That's a very technical word, things on topics related to DEI. So do you have anything that you can add to that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. We do have faculty actively doing this work and research. So more will be coming up, most definitely. So that's actively happening, yes. And two, through our Center for Women in Business, we have white papers available as well that bring together a lot of this data as well. As this particular center supports a Women Plus community and really focuses on advancing women from the classroom to the boardroom. And there's a myriad of white papers and research that they also conduct as well. So we do offer different ways to access this information. And for anybody who would like more information, feel free to send us over a direct email. And we can put our email right in here so that we can follow up with some of those white papers and other information available. And we'll add whatever we can in the chat too.
And just as an aside, one of the things that I've thought about trying to do, haven't gotten around to yet because I've been busy doing other stuff, is looking at B corporations in specific around employee connection and belonging. Because B corporations, for those who are familiar with them, have a very certain remit and mission statement and are evaluated on certain goals, measurable goals that label them as a B Corp. And if you go to the B Corp movement, I think the bcorp.net might be the website. You can get a listing of B Corps who have, as part of their charter and part of their measurable goals, social, or environmental, community, all the things, right? A lot of things that are related to stakeholder, a stakeholder model versus a shareholder model as well. So that's something to look at as well in terms of what kind of work. And anybody in here is in a B Corp, I'd love to hear about it, hear your experiences as well.
While we wait for any additional questions to come through, one question that came through privately that I wanted to mention is, do you offer any custom programs? So one thing I did want to make everyone aware is that through executive and professional education, we do offer custom programs that can be delivered on site at your company or association or on Bentley's campus. And we go global as well to our university partners, where we can offer programs or, your preference and as far as locations. And we offer everything as it relates to Gary's work, thinking about employee experience, to leadership accelerator programs to really think about high potentials. Our DEI work, we continue to evolve as well, delivered through our Center for Women in Business. So there's a lot of different offerings as well to consider. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and I will include information on one of our pages as well, so you can read a little bit more about some of our custom programs, in addition to a case study and example that I'll add here as well. With that, any last question?
And I'll just add real quick, my email for anybody who wants to get in touch with me directly about any of this is gdavid@bentley.edu. So feel free to reach out. Anything you want to communicate directly to me, that's how you would do it. And it's in the chat now, so isn't that convenient? So it's right there too.
Gary, thank you so much for this today. It was very inspiring and great information.
Thanks for having me. I'm always happy to engage with folks from outside, as well as through the executive professional education, doing great work. And so trying to bring what we know inside as faculty to the world outside is always something that even more so today, but always something that's it's vitally important that we do.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate everyone joining. We'll be sending this recording out. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And we'll be letting you know when our next power hour is coming up in March. So stay tuned. Take care. Bye-bye.